Welcome back to day 10 of digital learning. I hope you all had a great weekend. We're going over Unit 6, Lesson 2.2. A few sessions back, we used a part of a number line that showed 0, 1, and 2. Today, we're using a number line that shows 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we're using this number line to compare our fractions and see what fractions are greater, smaller, or equal to each other. So remember that we said that we can have another way to show whole numbers, like 1, 2, and 3. We said that we can show whole numbers by putting the number over 1. So I'm going to put 1 over 1, 2 over 1, and 3 over 1. And that's a different way that we can show whole numbers, is by putting the number over 1. If I wanted to mark 2/4 on the line, where would I mark it? If I wanted to put 2/4 on the number line, where would I mark it? Pause me now. If I was to put 2/4 on the number line, I would put it right here. And I could have figured that out by either thinking, I know that 2/4 is also equal to 1/2. Or I can also think that I could just separate it into fourths and know that that's 1/4 and 2/4. So that's where I would plot 2/4. So now let's think about the fraction 5/4. Pause me, and I want you to think about, what is this fraction and where would I put it? So one way I could think about 5/4 is if I compared it to the fraction 2/4. So I know 2/4 means that there's 4 parts that make up my whole, and 2 parts is the amount of parts that I have shaded in, the amount of parts that I want to show. So 2/4 would be how many parts of my whole. 5/4 would be, again, how many parts of my whole. My whole is still separated into 4, but I have a number bigger than 4. So if my number is bigger than 4, is it going to still be in one whole, or is it going to be bigger than one whole? If it's 5/4, it means it's going to be bigger than one whole. But I'm still going to separate it into 4 equal parts. So I'm going to go above one whole, separate it into 4 equal parts. And so I know that this is 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This is also 4/4, and then this would be 5/4. So let's say there's 2 ants traveling along the line. One ant, Ant A, I'm going to write A, traveled 2/4 of a block and then rested. The other ant, Ant B, traveled 5/8 of the block. Where am I going to put 5/8? Pause me and think about where I would put 5/8 on my number line. I could figure out 5/8 by separating my line into 8 parts. So a line in the middle, make 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. And then making sure I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts. So now I'm going to count to see what 5/8 is. So 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. And that's where Ant B rested. Which ant traveled farther? Ant A or Ant B? Pause me and think about which ant traveled farther. So let's think about how we can figure this out. I can just look at my number line, and since I plotted them, I see that 5/8 is farther, And I also know that if 2/4 is here, then also that would be equal to 4/8, because 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts when it's divided into 8 parts. I know that 5/8 is bigger than 4/8, and another reason that I can see that is that 2/4 equals 4/8, and that's on our equivalent fractions poster. So 5/8 is greater than 2/4, and we figured that out by just seeing that it's farther on the number line and seeing that 2/4, which is equivalent to 4/8, would be also smaller than 5/8. How can we write something to show that 5/8 is greater than 2/4? Remember that the greater than, less than, and equal to sign. So how can I show that 5/8 is greater than 2/4? Pause me now. I can write that 5/8 is greater than 2/4. And the way I like to think about this is that each of these symbols are alligators. And an alligator is really hungry. What would it want to eat? Would it want to eat more of something or less of something? So which way would my symbol face? It'd want to face towards the number that's bigger, or my fraction that's bigger. It wants to eat more. So how else can I write that 5/8 is greater than 2/4? Can I use the less than symbol to compare my fractions of 2/4 and 5/8? Pause me now and think about, how can I use the less than symbol to compare my two fractions? Think about how my alligator wants to eat. I could write that 2/4 is less than 5/8, because that is what my alligator wants to eat. Your have-to today is working on page 369 and 370, and you're going to be using these number lines to compare fractions. I'm going to be showing an example right now for number 1 using Kami to how can I compare my fractions. So what you're going to do on 369 and 371 is you're going to use the number lines to solve the problems. Record your solution by using less than, greater than, or equal to. So I'm going to write underneath less than, greater than, and equal to. I'm just going to use an arrow just draw to point what goes to what. Just that way we are clear about what each sign means. So number 1, Aunt C walked 2/6 of the distance from 0 to 1 on the number line, and Aunt D walked 2/3 of the distance from 0 to 1. Who walked farther? Or did the ants walk the same distance? How do you know? So Aunt C walked 2/6 of the distance from 0 to 1. So what I'm going to do is mark up Aunt C for 2/6. So what I do when I want to separate into 6 is first make it into 2 parts, then separate it into thirds. So 3 and 3 are on each side. So now I'm separating into thirds. That way I have equal parts. So Aunt C walked 1/2/6. I'm going to write right below that C for Aunt C. Aunt D walked 2/3 of the same distance from 0 to 1. So now I'm going to use a different color to show Aunt D. And I'm going to split up my number line into thirds. What's really easy is that we already remember that 2/6 is equal to 1/3. And 4/6 is equal to 2/3. I could have also just figured that out by splitting it up, but I'm able to see that 2/6 is equal to 1/3, and 2/3 would then be equal to 4/6. And that is Aunt D. So the question is, who walked farther, or did the ants walk the same distance? How do you know? So I'm going to look at this and see which ant walked farther. Did Aunt C or Aunt D walk farther? So I see Aunt D walked farther because it's farther on the number line. What I can write is that 2/3 and 2/6. And I want to figure out who walked farther. Which sign would show me that 2/3 is greater than 2/6? I would know that this sign because my alligator mouth is pointing to the bigger number. The question isn't asking me to compare, it's asking me who walked farther. So here is what proves how I figured out who walked farther, and then I need to answer the question by writing Aunt D walked farther. What I want you to do now is the same thing that I just did for number 1 on numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 on page 369 and 370, where you're comparing using greater than, less than, or equal to. Then come back here so that we can go over it when you are done. At this point, you should have finished both workbook pages because now we're going to be going over it. So for number 2, it says compare 3/4 and 6/8 on the number line. Which fraction is greater, or are the fractions equal? So what I did here, I'm actually going to move this closer so you're able to see. What I did here is compare 3/4 and 6/8. I first put 3/4 on the number line by separating it into 4 equal parts. And then I did 6/8 by separating it into 6 equal parts. What I see here is that they both landed on the same part. So what I can say for that is that 3/4 is equal to 6/8. And I'm going to add that on our poster. What I was able to just do is find an equivalent fraction, 3/4 and 6/8, by using my number line. Number 3 says, Aunt D walked 4/8 of the distance from 0 to 1 on the number line, and Aunt E walked 5/8 of the distance from 0 to 1. Who walked farther, or did they walk the same distance? How do you know? So I saw that they both had 8 equal parts, so I separated it into 8 equal parts, and then put 4/8 on 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5/8 on the next plot. So what I was able to see is that 4/8 is less than 5/8. It took up less room on my number line. So that would tell me that Aunt E walked farther. For number 4, the question was compare 7/6 and 7/3 on the number line. Which fraction is greater, or are the fractions equal? How do you know? And this one was trickier because it made us think about two fractions that were bigger than my whole. So I knew that 7/6 is going to be bigger than 1 whole. So I first marked off 6 equal parts and counted 1 6, 2 6, 3 6, 4 6, 5 6, 6 6, and then 7 6. 7/3 was really tricky. This was a challenge problem because I knew that 7/3 is again more than 1 whole. So I marked up my thirds to find 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3, and 6/3. So what I have here right now is I'm at 6/3 at 2. But my question is 7/3. So I would have to go off the number line and add 1 more third to be 7/3. So my question is, which fraction is greater, or are the fractions equal? So how can I figure out that my fractions are greater or equal? So I'm looking at my number line and I see that 7/3 is way off the number line. So I would write 7/3 is greater than, my alligator is facing towards my bigger fraction because that's the one that they want to eat, greater than 7/6. Number 5 says, Aunt F walked 1/4 of the distance from 0 to 1, and Aunt G walked 2/8 of the distance from 0 to 1. Who walked farther, or did they walk the same distance? How do you know? So I separate it first into 4 equal parts for Aunt F and put 1/4. And then I did 8 equal parts for Aunt G and put 2/8. So I see that F and G, both aunts, are at the same part on my number line. So that makes me figure out that 1/4 is equal to 2/8. And that's another thing that I can now add on my fraction sheet. So what we did today is we used number lines to help us figure out how to compare fractions using greater than, less than, or equal to. You can also do this with a fraction bar to help you figure out which fraction is greater than, equal to, or less than.